Everyone could find their way to a seat. We are ready to begin. I'd like to extend my welcome to the DPIIC members, DPIIC agency staff, stakeholders, and participants. It's an honor to call to order the 7th meeting of the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. We first met 3 years ago in April 2014. Since then, we have convened every 6 months to discuss implementation of the Delta Plan, administration priorities, and discuss how to implement best available science and best management practices intended to improve statewide water supply reliability and ecosystem conditions in the Delta. This committee plays a unique and important role in increasing the level of cooperation between federal, state, and local agencies on priority actions in the Delta. The committee is called out in the Delta Reform Act, described in the Delta Plan, and is specifically highlighted in the Governor's California Water Action Plan. This is one of the few venues that exist to help further the sustainable management of the Delta by creating a public dialogue about the various initiatives and in particular discussing new opportunities for coordinated state and federal interagency action in the Delta. Some of you have been here for each of the previous 6 meetings. I would like now to welcome several new members. Solano County Supervisor Skip Thompson, representing the Delta Protection Commission and also a member of the Delta Stewardship Council. And is Michael Jewell here? Michael Jewell's seat is right there, representing the Army Corps of Engineers. He had the least distance to travel. Their office is right across the street, so of course, that would be the vacant seat for now. And then I was going to introduce Bill Croyle, Acting Director of DWR, but Cindy Messer is pinch hitting for Bill today. We extend our thanks to former DWR Director Mark Cowan for his participation and contributions to this committee and wish him well in his retirement. This committee has a track record of success. When faced with successive years of drought, you agreed to appoint one of your agency's high-level representatives to serve on a work group to identify high-impact, near-term science needs. This work group, the Delta Agency Science Work Group, identified gaps in our science understanding that were not currently being addressed. You will hear more about the continued progress that is being made on this effort later today. Acknowledging science is a common thread that binds the work of each of our agencies. So last year we focused the theme of DPIIC meetings on One Delta, One Science. As one committee member, Felicia, remarked, we are seeing collaboration in all of our agencies, but we have a lot to do. We have to find the sweet spot. Science offers the greatest areas where we can focus. With leadership provided from USGS, the committee also supported a DPIIC-inspired and significantly important effort last November, the Science Enterprise Workshop, that was held at UC Davis and brought in experts from across the country to discuss how to manage, fund, and communicate science for effective management of ecosystems. At our most recent DPIIC meeting, you endorsed the preliminary results of that workshop and expressed the desire to apply the main concepts as guiding principles for our work here in the Delta. The amount of work each of your agencies is engaged in is not only impressive, but it's also critical to improving conditions in the Delta. Our meeting today intends to create a narrative for how each of these various efforts intersect. To name a few, reinitiation of consultation on the coordinated long-term operation of CVP and SWP projects, Water Fix Adaptive Management Framework, Delta Smelt Resiliency Strategy, Salmon Resiliency Strategy, Prop 1 solicitations, voluntary settlement agreements in the Sacramento and San Joaquin tributaries, Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan update, regulations for measuring and reporting water diversions as called for in SB 88. Each of these activities and more play an important role in achieving the co-equal goals, and our objective today will be to increase awareness and identify opportunities for further cooperation. So at today's meeting, we want to provide each member agency time to describe your work related to Delta matters and the current challenges and successes that you are focused on. Provide opportunities throughout this meeting to interact with each other. And in response to information provided during each agenda item, we want to encourage discussion that leads to identifying opportunities for coordination for critical implementation actions. It's an honor to have all of you here, and I look forward to our discussion today. Now, I would like to turn the floor over to Jessica Law, our Special Assistant for Planning and Science at the Delta Stewardship Council, and who serves as the coordinator for this committee's activities, to review today's agenda. Jessica?
Thank you, Chair, for your meeting. Committee members, today we're going to cover several topics. Agency priorities for 2017, recent accomplishments, a progress report on EcoRestore, and key recommendations from the Interagency Review of Permitting Barriers and Best Practices, an update on collaborative science efforts, including the draft 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, next steps coming out of the Science Enterprise Workshop, and a proposal and agency request from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation to participate in an integrated ecosystem modeling pilot study. We've provided background information on each of these topics in a binder in advance of the meeting. For those in the audience, these materials are also available online. And I just wanted to thank each of you for contributing to the coordinator's report that's in the front of the binder. We really appreciate this information. It helps create a bit of a narrative of what's going on in each of your agencies, and we intend to keep this as a bit of a living document, so we'll continue to update it between now and the next meeting in November. Also included in your binder is a copy of the agency review of the EcoRestore project tracking matrix, a policy briefing paper on integrated modeling from the organizers of the 2015 NSF workshop, a copy of the proposal for structured decision-making from the Bureau, and a few other items that I hope you'll find an interesting read. So we hope this provides good background for the discussion today, and I think we're ready to get started on the first
Great,
part.
Jessica. Thank you. So on to agenda item number 2. I'd like to, as promised, give you each an opportunity to share your agency's goals and hopeful successes as you look forward through 2017. I'll begin to my left. As it comes to you, identify who you are, your agency, and your role. And we look forward to hearing lots of good things. Cliff, please start.
Thank you, Randy. I've got 4 items that I'd like to share with the group. One of them, I think, very much informational, and 3 of them are some of the things that are priorities that are coming up for us. The 4 areas that I'm going to just discuss briefly with you is, one, the concept of weather whiplash, which California has experienced over the last 12 to 18 months, moving from one of our most extreme droughts to our wettest year on record for the Northern Sierra. Give you a little bit of update on some of that information, and also extend it to a little bit further than just California. I also want to talk a little bit about a drought synthesis effort for the Delta that we are embarking on, and we'll be requesting information from many of you to help put together this document. I also wanted to give you a brief update on what we have dubbed Operation Baseline. It's basically a series of studies to start this year to begin to look at conditions appropriate to help us address how the upgrade of the SAC Regional wastewater treatment plant will affect the Delta as we move from the build-out phase now to the full operation phase in 2021. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about some ongoing efforts that involve aquatic invasive plants in the Delta, and some things that have happened and some things that will be happening. So those are the 4 items that I'm going to cover briefly. Let me start out with this concept of weather whiplash. A colleague of mine, actually working in the Midwest, used this term in a paper that was just recently published in the journal Biogeochemistry. The term is one that she utilized to describe what happened in the Midwest in 2011-12 when they went from a very severe drought throughout the Midwest to very rapid, high intensity precipitation events, mostly through frontal storms and through some very serious thunderstorms. And what that did was, going from one extreme to the other extreme, it basically mobilized huge quantities of nutrients that had been sitting basically in the fields, in these row crop field areas. And when transport became available, when the precipitation returned, and they got a lot of overland flow and movement of material into the waterways of that part of the world, huge pulse went all the way down the Mississippi River and out into the Gulf of Mexico. And they were then able to follow that in terms of its effect on many of the aquatic conditions and ecosystems in the Gulf. So this is what they're terming weather whiplash. A lot of people seem to be liking the use of that term. I've been seeing the media pick up on it. I wanted to just highlight a few things that would, in my mind, maybe help put some of the things going on here in California into that kind of a perspective. As I think all of you probably are well aware, we have broken, it actually was on April the 13th, my birthday, we broke the record for the most precipitation in the 8-station index area of Northern California. As of today, I did a quick check, we are at about 91 inches of precipitable moisture in these 8 stations, breaking the past record of 82, 83 when 88.5 inches were received. So new record for precipitation in the Northern Sierra. One of the things I find interesting is that this very, very wet spell that we've had and continue to have is more than a California-wide phenomenon. In fact, there's a very interesting graph put out here recently by NOAA that shows how much of the western United States is in that similar kind of condition. And so if you take a look at a diagram, and I'll be more than happy to provide it to everyone, it came out yesterday, but basically that diagram shows where in the western United States we have record precipitation from 1895 onward. The Northern Sierra is one certain area, but most of good portion of Nevada, particularly in the northern part of Nevada, record precipitation. Parts of northern Utah, most of eastern Idaho, almost all of western Wyoming, and a fair part of the north and central part of Montana. All have received record precipitation this winter. So this is a phenomenon that is quite widespread. And one of the interesting aspects of that is the mechanism behind this, and that is that we have had, as of April the 12th, 49 atmospheric rivers hit the western coast of the United States. And many of those have extended also inland, and so you now have a situation where record precipitation is over a substantive part of the western United States. That's also had a boon to the snowpack, and so I think many of you have heard about also the large snowpack that's up. That I would point out that you might want to keep in mind is that 82, 83 is the year with the biggest snowpack. And one of the things that has been seen in this year with the wet conditions is, so we did receive more some of our other wet years, and this is certainly probably represents the warming conditions that are come along with these storms. And just so, just the drought index that many of you probably follow from the drought monitor, where last year at this time we had over half the state in either extreme or exceptional drought. Now we have only a very small part of the southern part of the state and the southwest coast in moderate drought. So quite an amazing change. Weather whiplash at its best. I also wanted to talk briefly about a new effort that we have just recently funded, and it's a project to pull together all the information that we can find relative to how drought was managed during the 2012-2016 drought. This is an effort that is going to be carried out by the UC Davis Center for Watershed Science. We're going to be pulling together information from a variety of different sources, including some of the physical effects of drought, some of the chemical effects of drought, some of the effects on economics, on agriculture, and pull that together into a document that will be developed over the next 12 to 14 months. We'd like to have this document completed by early 2018, and hopefully this will be a source document for looking at drought effects and also how to look to do management better in future droughts. So this is a document that I wanted to highlight that we're just embarking on, and many of your scientists and science program managers will be asked for input to help us with this document. The other thing I wanted to briefly highlight is the Operation Baseline. Operation Baseline is a series of projects that have gone through a peer review process that we've selected for funding. The funds will be going out the door soon. We're going to be funding a series of projects that are going to be focusing then on key background information that we feel is important to get before the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant. So, for example, we'll be funding studies that look at the movement of the effluent through the river, the various kinds of chemical and biological transformations that this material goes through, how it affects food webs, and what are some of the rates of the processes that are cycling this material. We also will be providing money to help develop some advanced modeling. Jessica already talked a little bit about integrated modeling. This is an example of integrated modeling where we take models that are good at characterizing the hydrodynamics of the delta and then add an overlay to look at some of the chemical changes that will be going on as this material moves through the system, and then also address how this will change when the amount of the source from the wastewater treatment plant will be substantively reduced and the form will be changed from currently an ammonium-dominated waste effluent to a nitrate-dominated waste effluent. So that is some of the things that we're dubbing Operation Baseline. The idea here is to get this started now, try to get some data for a few years before the upgrade, and then continue to make these measurements after the upgrade is completed, and hopefully learn from what is a $2 billion experiment in the Delta and see what some of the effects will be. And then the one last thing that I wanted to just briefly mention is some of the ongoing activities that relate to invasive aquatic vegetation in the Delta. In 2015, there was a symposium at UC Davis focused on this topic. I wanted to let you know that the peer-reviewed paper from that document has been developed, submitted, and is in review at the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science Journal. Hopefully will be out soon. We're also planning another meeting on all invasive species within the Delta. That'll be held August 29th again at UC Davis. It's being put together by the Delta Interagency Invasive Species Coordination. Many of the agencies here at this table have been involved in that overall effort. And then in addition, I wanted to highlight that the Interagency Ecological Program has put together a aquatic vegetation project work team, and that work team is also involved in trying to synthesize and pull together some of the information on invasive aquatic plants within the Delta. So those are the things that I wanted to briefly highlight as ongoing activities with the science program, part of the Delta Stewardship Council. Thank you.
Cliff, thanks. Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Tjernell with the Natural Resources Agency, the California Natural Resources Agency, sitting in for Secretary John Laird today. He regrets he wasn't able to make it, but I'm pleased to be here in his stead. A lot going on at agency these days, and I suppose like any good parent, maybe there's some opportunity or good timing to claim good things that not offspring, but other departments under the agency are doing right now. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on some things that actually have some DWR overlap as well, but agency is certainly helping to spearhead those. First of all, one of the things that Cliff mentioned was this precipitation whiplash, or this weather whiplash of sorts. So the question at agency recently has been, and certainly DWR as well, and the flood board absolutely, has been, okay, so now what do we do with that? There is clearly tremendous need in the Central Valley and statewide. A 2013 report done by DWR identified over $50 billion, probably closer to $100 billion worth of critical flood management improvements needed statewide. Draft 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan that hopefully will be adopted this year and made final mentions around $21 billion of immediate need, or at least immediate, in the timescales that government works at over the next 20 to 30 years to address known water management challenges. Well, we don't have that much money, and so what do we actually have available? We need to do really good, smart things with. And so back in 2014, voters obviously approved Proposition 1. It included $395 million for multi-benefit flood management improvements. On one hand, a significant amount of money, and on the other hand, as I just mentioned for context, not very much as far as what we ultimately need. The money needs to be spent on multi-benefit projects that not only convey or confer flood protection, flood risk reduction benefits, but also improve baseline conditions for fish and wildlife species. The basic breakdown of the $395 million is the majority of that needs to be spent in the legal delta and Sassoon Marsh, $295 million in those areas, and only $100 million for everywhere else in the state, including the rest of the Central Valley. And so the question then is, so how do we actually spend these funds so that they go as far as possible? And the governor announced several months ago, or a couple months ago now, a proposal for how to do that. And it's largely based off of what's included in the draft 2017 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And it really lays out a very clear programmatic approach to, and really a portfolio approach to these sorts of investments, understanding that we are in an era of financial scarcity. So reflected in that, especially I'll just focus on the Delta component, a significant proposed investment in Delta urban levee systems, significant proposed investment in the traditional local levee assistance programs like the subventions program, Delta Levee special projects programs within DWR, some modest financing for emergency response, and then a large proportion of those funds proposed for what we call quote-unquote system scale projects. And these are really the larger projects that can be found most easily generally in the lower Yolo bypass and some areas in the lower San Joaquin River. These areas where if we invest wisely, we can not only see localized flood benefits, but also system scale, regional scale, landscape level flood benefits that would then be ostensibly felt in the rural areas, agricultural areas, small communities, and urban sectors. So just wanted to bring everyone's attention to that. If you weren't already aware, there is that proposal, and we look forward to working with the legislature on that eventual appropriation that we hope will happen soon. A couple other things to mention really quickly, the smelt resiliency strategy. So a couple years ago, the Resources Agency took the lead to develop the Delta Smelt Resiliency Strategy. And this is really based on can we actually articulate a distillation or a distilled list of projects that are discrete, known, have the potential to be well supported, and in doing so, a better chance of being financed. We continue to see good progress there. I won't go into details, but some projects are already bearing fruit, in particular North Delta food production projects that are supporting basic food web that's relied upon by Delta Smelt. And we are now beginning the development of a complementary, if you will, or at least very similar salmon resiliency strategy that will be focused in the Sacramento River Basin, mostly higher up in the system. So we look forward to developing that. And again, it's really to create a center of gravity that we can all rally around, or we can all, as in who would ever like to, when it comes to asking for state money, private financing, and articulation of priorities. It's really thematic of a lot of the work that this group does related to science, prioritization, things like that. So a lot of good stuff happening in agency, and our departments like DWR, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, a lot of good collaboration there, and again, just look forward to this discussion today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Gordon Burns, sitting in for Secretary Matt Rodriguez of Cal EPA. all of the relevant programs and projects at Cal EPA are housed within the Water Board, so I'll leave to Felicia more description of that. But I just wanted to highlight briefly a topic that we've been interested in that's gotten a lot of discussion over the last few years and is particularly highlighted by drought, and that is the need to better facilitate conjunctive use projects so that we can replenish groundwaters in times when we have water, like this year, and not enough surface storage to put it, and also to be able to locate groundwater in the places that need it so that folks, as they have to comply with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, have the means to do so. So we've started a conversation within the agency on how to do that. There have been a lot of ideas thrown out over the years. There's a lot of work going on by UC Davis, by Sustainable Conservation, by the California Farm Bureau, by DPIIC on this topic, and we think that there are a lot of really interesting ideas out there right now and things to develop as we move forward.
Hi, my name is Michelle Bononis. I'm the area manager of the Bay Delta office with the Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm sitting in on behalf of our acting regional director, Pablo Arriabe. So just a couple of priorities for us that I think are really worth mentioning, and I should mention we have many priorities, but I picked the top three. So first of all, and Randy already mentioned it, the reinitiation of coordination on the coordinated long-term operation of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project. Reclamation as the lead federal agency and DWR as the applicant for the federal ESA consultation on that project, reinitiated consultation on our current 2008 and 2009 Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries biological opinions late last summer. Later on last year, right before the new year, we signed a memorandum of understanding among the 5 federal and state agencies, including National Marine Fisheries Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Reclamation, DWR, and the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And that MOU outlines roles and responsibilities of the respective agencies in the process. We're actually anticipating commencement of public scoping for the National Environmental Policy Act portion later this year. And we're actually really looking forward to a collaborative stakeholder engagement process as we work forward on the development of alternatives for that project. We see a really great opportunity with the reinitiation of consultation, and we call it the ROC on LTO. We see a really great opportunity for inclusive engagement and really creative, collaborative brainstorming. We really have an opportunity to do something good with it, I think, and we are in a really unique situation where we're not under a court-mandated schedule. We feel like we have some time and ability to really be creative and maybe think of some avenues we haven't thought of with our operations in the past, so we're very excited about it. Secondly, the Water Infrastructure Investment for the Nation Act, the WIN Act. We are working, of course, on figuring out all the ins and outs of the WIN Act and the implementation. WIN was passed by Congress on December 16th of 2016. Subtitle J of that act specifically contains water-specific provisions for the state of California, primarily real-time operations and subsequent coordination and reporting mechanisms under the Act for things like old and middle river criteria, turbidity, storm events, things of that nature. It also emphasizes certain storage and water supply projects, some habitat improvement projects, conservation facilities for fish, and it also addresses certain invasive species. And then it also, going back to the ROC on LTO, the reinitiation of consultation, it actually provides also a Federal Advisory Committee Act or FACA exemption for CSAMP, which is the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program as well. And then finally, and my colleague, Mr. David Mooney, who's the Deputy Area Manager for the Bay Delta office, is going to discuss structured decision-making and the pilot project that we're putting forward today, and he and Jessica will be talking about that later. We really feel if this pilot is successful that structured decision-making holds real value in helping to guide decisions on how we best utilize our resources. And as Dave will articulate today, as I cannot speak, we are seeking DPIIC member participation in that process. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tomas Torres, and I am the director of EPA's Water Division in San Francisco. I've got a couple of updates to share with you. In terms of priorities, I think we're in the midst of figuring that out and formulating our priorities for the coming couple of years. I think there's no doubt that water and wastewater infrastructure will continue to be a top priority for EPA. We shall see how our budget eventually shakes out under this proposed blueprint that the president has laid out. But nevertheless, I wanted to just let folks know that we currently have a request for proposals out on the street, and this is for what we call the San Francisco Bay Water Quality Improvement Fund, and this is a program that has been in existence for more than a decade, really to focus on restoring wetlands, improving water quality around the 10-county San Francisco Bay. And this year, we're placing particular emphasis on projects within disadvantaged communities. So I encourage folks who are interested to take a look at the announcement. It's in the packet, hopefully, that you've got on the back. And the conclusion of the RFP is on May 10th. So looking forward to getting some good proposals there. Contrary to what some folks may say, we are investing heavily in science. And I just wanted to point out that in your packets are some brief summaries of a couple of science studies that we have been investing in, particularly with thermal tolerance of Chinook, one that was funded back in '06, and then one that is currently underway. As well as a study to evaluate improvements to the salinity of water quality monitoring network in the San Francisco estuary. So if you have any questions about those studies, Erin and I are happy to talk with you a little bit later about those. I also just wanted to make a quick plug for the 2017 State of the Estuary Conference, which will take place in Lake Merritt in Oakland on October 10th and 11th. And many of you may be familiar with what this conference is about. It is a great complement to the Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Science Conference, which I think both groups are trying to have their conferences on every other year so that they don't kind of conflict with each other. So wanted to just point that out. Earlier this January, we hosted a workshop in our offices specifically on permitting and regional permitting and monitoring to see where there are ways to find efficiencies in whether it's federal permitting or whatnot, really to advance the monitoring efforts around the Bay. We have a lot of information from that meeting on our website, and we'd be happy to share that with you. And lastly, I just wanted to also mention that the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, really great guys, have this what's called the Estuary Partnership and Blueprint meetings. These are coordination meetings they had one on March 1st, and they're going to have quarterly meetings. Want to thank Jessica for coming out to attend that meeting, and wanted to kind of in future meetings just maybe we can be a little bit of the link between that group and this one, because I think there's some complementary areas where having that engagement would be good, given that that group is more downstream, and I think there's a lot of complementary efforts that we can all learn from. So I think that's it.
Good afternoon. I'm Campbell Ingram with the Delta Conservancy. I'm the executive officer. Good to see you all here this afternoon. Very happy to be able to share some of our accomplishments recently and what some of our priorities are for 2017, really based on all the good work of our staff, the board, and all of our partners. First, I want to talk a little bit about Proposition 1. We're currently in our second round solicitation for Prop 1 funding. Next week, we'll be taking staff recommendations to our board for consideration. We anticipate potentially funding approximately $6 million in restoration projects this round. Our first round we completed last year. We funded about $6 million as well. And we're currently in the process of finalizing grant agreements from last year's rounds and getting those projects underway and actually starting to see some invoices coming through. So it's very gratifying to finally see some Proposition 1 funding moving forward. I think one of our biggest challenges in that program is that we've been undersubscribed to that program now for 2 years. We had originally hoped to move between $6 and $10 million, between $9 and $10 million per year, and both years now we've been right at about the $6 million mark. And we think that's attributable to a variety of factors, but we all went into this with the expectation that there were lots of projects ready to go, and we just needed the funding to make them happen. And I think, as we all know, those projects really take a tremendous amount of development planning to get them up and ready to go. So we've done a pretty extensive soul-searching survey of our process and interviewed applicants and reviewers and some of our agency partners. I think what we're going to try to do is shift a little bit more to focusing on helping people come together with their concepts, develop their partnerships, and then realize that funding's available to do all the planning components to get them ready to receive implementation funding. So not necessarily a shift toward planning, but a shift towards trying to get good projects to develop and bring partnerships together. So we're excited about trying to push that forward. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Cache Slough Regional Restoration Planning effort. I've talked with you all quite a bit about that in the past. It is up and running now. I think 6 months ago I said that we were just about ready to start. If you recall, that process is trying to really drill down on a region within the Delta and work with all of the represented interests, agriculture, the counties, the water agencies, the RCDs, all the state agencies, and several consultants, really to try to drill down on that area and try to understand what is the ecosystem opportunity and what does that look like with the current agricultural landscape and the current water supply, intake structures, as well as flood protection in that system. It's been a very gratifying process. That group has come together and reviewed all the relevant, readily available information about ecosystem, agriculture, flood, and water supply. And just this last meeting, which unfortunately I had to miss because I was out of town, they started to really do the overlay exercise, really looking at how do these opportunities line up and where are restoration opportunities really presenting themselves potentially in this region. Phase 1 will sort of end very shortly with sort of that level of analysis, and we're starting to scope out Phase 2. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this process and some of the tools that we're hoping to develop to support that later on in our agenda. But it's actually a very gratifying process. You're seeing stakeholders coming together, agreeing on the information that's going to be considered, and then starting to see how that information really stacks up together. Sort of a new ray of sunshine in our geography. I wanted to talk a little bit about our Delta tourism awareness and 5-year marketing strategy that was just completed, working very closely with the Delta Protection Commission as well as a task force of people who are actively promoting the Delta, recreation and tourism within the Delta. We have developed a 5-year marketing plan for the Delta. Ultimately, what it does is it lays out a series of strategies, ways that they can promote themselves, but it characterizes them as high cost or low cost, medium cost, and high cost strategies. And now the task really is trying to work with them to continue their work together to identify which of those priorities within that strategic plan they want to engage on and how they can help market themselves. We want to sort of pull back from it being a state-led, state-funded planning process and turn it over and allow them to do the work that they need to do to promote themselves. One of the really fantastic things that came out of that is a website, a Delta promotional website. If you look on our write-up, you'll see the website address. But it's just really, really well done. If you want to know anything that you can do in the Delta and see the links and the maps and all the opportunities, it's all right there. The task force will continue to work on ultimately populating the information in that website, as well as just how they want to continue to operate it in the future. And it's also going to have a lot of crowdsourcing. So if you're going to the Delta and you have a great experience, you can actually write something up and help promote the Delta. So it really is a really great tool that is now available as a result of a collaborative effort out in the Delta. Lastly, I wanted to update you on our wetland carbon efforts. Again, I've talked about this here a number of times, but the American Carbon Registry has just approved a carbon methodology for wetlands and rice in the Delta. This will allow landowners to consider engaging the voluntary carbon market, change their agricultural practices potentially, and then engage that market to receive revenue for those changed practices. This has huge ramifications in terms of stopping subsidence, very slowly starting to reverse subsidence, reducing GHG emissions and even sequestering GHG emissions, and then ultimately getting revenue for doing so. We are very actively working right now with a variety of partners, private and state, to try to take some of the existing wetlands and get them ready to actually engage this market, get some contracts in place so that we can actually demonstrate that this protocol is being engaged and there are carbon credits under contract and revenues being generated, all as a way to demonstrate to the Air Resources Board that this is a viable protocol that should be adopted into the compliance program, which ultimately doubles the incentive. It takes the carbon market price now of 7 to 10 and doubles that into the compliance system. Also very excited, I don't share this beyond this room, but as of Wednesday, it will be announced that the Conservancy, as well as all of our partners, have actually received the Innovation Award from American Carbon Registry for this year for the development of this very innovative protocol. So we're very proud of that and very much looking forward to continuing that effort.
Do we have to wait till November to applaud?
So, I'm sorry, wait till November?
Do we have to wait until November to applaud?
You can apply anytime you like.
Applaud.
Apply.
To give you,
I just said apply, I'm sorry.
Even though we're not going to tell anyone beyond
No,
this room.
as of Wednesday, it will be officially announced. So those are the major updates for the Conservancy. You know, I think just in regard to challenges, manpower and resources are always a challenge. When you look at the carbon, I feel like we're in a bit of a startup company. There's endless opportunity, but it's really hard to realize the resources to actually try to really capitalize on that opportunity and push it and make things happen. So thank you very much. Look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Castleberry, Assistant Regional Director with the Fish and Wildlife Service, sitting in for Paul Souza, Regional Director for the Fish and Wildlife Service. So several folks around the table have covered some items on my list. I'll just mention those items, and there are a couple more I'll mention that will probably be mentioned again as we make our way around the table. Maybe one of the hallmarks of this group is that we do work together on a number of items. So for the Fish and Wildlife Service, our priorities for the Delta this year include completing consultation on the Cal water fix, big item for us. Continuing to work with the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, the Collaborative Adaptive Management Team under that program, the Interagency Ecological Program, Delta Science Program, this committee and others to identify and advance priority science investments. Working with the State Water Resources Control Board and others on updates to the Delta Water Quality Control Plan. The Rock-On LTO, reinitiated consultation on our biological opinion for coordinated long-term operations of the Central Valley and State Water Project. And then finally, one of the other items that was mentioned earlier was the other aspects of the water supply infrastructure improvements for the Nations Act. We're working with Reclamation, National Marine Fisheries Service, and others to comply with that act. There are a number of aspects specific to the Bay Delta watershed and some of the activities I've already mentioned. And Michelle did a good job of covering that. A couple of other things I'd like to highlight. We are working to continue and to improve and implement what we're calling the Enhanced Delta Smelt monitoring effort that we initiated in December. We expect to continue to make improvements there. I think through what's called the LOBO review, we'll be asking the Delta Science Program to review some aspects of our activities and recommend some improvements. So again, that's an important ongoing effort that we initiated this year that I think has greatly increased the level of knowledge we have about the distribution and abundance of Delta smelt and better informed our ability to provide information that helps with operations of the state and federal water projects. Also wanted to highlight something that we've been working very closely with the Department of Water Resources on, with help from Reclamation, and that's working with the other interagency ecological agencies to plan for construction of a co-located estuarine research station and fish technology center in the Delta. It's been a long ongoing effort, and we hope to reach some milestones this year. And then finally, kind of building off of Cliff's mention of weather whiplash, one of the things we're doing after going through a number of years of drought, trying to get water to our national wildlife refuges, and now we're looking at repairs we'll need to make to those refuges due to the flooding that occurred over the last year. So it was a great turnaround, and the refuges are doing well, but there's some recovery that we need to do. So with that, I'll end.
Chris Tjernell took most of the wind out of my sails in talking about the flood plan, but that's basically what the flood board is involved in. This is the first mandated update of the plan since it was first adopted in 2012, and there's a lot more specificity in this plan than before. Going through these public hearings and listening to the testimony and so on, it's interesting to note that this plan is a much different plan than what was originally proposed in the old system. And the department had a choice to make when they presented this plan, and one of the choices was just to recommend a plan that fixed up the old system with Band-Aids and wire and so on to keep it going for another 100 years, but they didn't do that. This is a much different plan than the old plan, and that's what we need to impart at these hearings that we're going through. Basically, it's different because it proposes for the first time that levees are going to be repaired and rehabilitated at different levels, depending upon what's behind them. That's why we have an urban levee design criteria and a rural design criteria and different standards for those that are going to protect small communities in rural areas. That's much different than the old plan. Second, this plan involves expanding bypasses in order to reduce the river stages in high water events. That was never contemplated in the old days because the idea was to reclaim land for agriculture, and if it flooded in the winter, well, fine. We'll do the agriculture in the summertime. But when you have subdivisions and when you have high investment behind those levees, that concept doesn't work. So bypasses are being expanded. The third area is flood releases in the reservoirs are going to be coordinated. And of course, we saw that in the last high water event where we made some progress in coordinating those levee releases or those reservoir releases more appropriately. And that's a concept in the plan. And finally, the main difference in this plan are that multi-benefit elements are going to be part of every flood project that's built to the extent feasible. And that, of course, was never in the old plan. So in order to get this plan updated and a little more specificity and moving toward implementation, there's going to have to be a real understanding of what this new plan is all about. So we're going to be spending, for 2017, we're spending about the first half of the year on the public hearings and the workshops and getting the plan adopted in June. And the second half of the year is going to be devoted to implementing the plan. That is prioritizing, like Chris indicated, the amount of money that we have and the number of projects we're able to fund. And the main difference, the main issue here is going to be we have to develop a sustainable funding source for operation and maintenance. This system is greatly in need of repair. Every inspection report that I've seen, either by the department or by the Corps of Engineers, have said the system is in great need of repair. And the projects that, or the money that's being talked about at the federal level that may be possible to be applied for, every one of those programs is going to have levies that meet the so-called PL 8499 standard. And none of our levies meet that standard. At least 90% of them meet that standard. So that's a challenge. But the levy investment strategy, which is a report that the department did, it's about 200 pages. They're working on a executive summary of that, which I think will be a lot better and an easier read for the public. But in any event, that levy investment strategy is a report that basically will attempt to lay out the different alternatives for funding, and we're going to have to come to some decision on what we can use for stabilizing the implementation and operation and maintenance part of the levy system, and those funds that will be used for one-time capital improvements. So we're going to be working through the summer on those implementation issues. We're going to be working for using the essentially reconstituted series of implementation committees built on what we've done since 2012 with local stakeholders and groups of people meeting to try to arrive at solutions that we all can support. So that's basically what we'll be doing through the year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Skip Thompson, the Chair of the Delta Protection Commission. And we have, at the Delta Protection Commission, we have 3 initiatives that I'll touch on today. The first would be the Delta as Place Interagency Working Group. The working group is focused on facilitating Delta as Place policies and recommendations identified in the Delta Plan and additional Delta as Place projects. At the working group on March 21st, members discussed the Delta Plan performance measures. It also talked about a white paper concerning Delta as Place, the launch of the website that Camo mentioned. It's visitcadelta.com. And also the future recommendations and efforts of this working group will be reported to the DPIIC and will provide guidance to the Delta Stewardship Council, Delta Independent Science Board, and Delta Science Program. The second initiative, Campbell already mentioned it, it's a Delta Awareness Campaign. We're in partnership with them. But one of the things I think eventually we're hoping that effort will lead to will be a regional tourism commission to coordinate with county visitors bureaus. And then finally, the third initiative is the Delta Community Action Planning in the legacy communities in the Delta. The project is focused on selecting and prioritizing actions to improve quality of life, economic development, historic preservation, and public safety in the Delta area. The Commission conducted a pilot program in Cortland, Clarksburg, and Walnut Grove last year. And what the commission was trying to do, or will be trying to do, is assisting community members with implementing existing community action plans. And staff is expecting to expand this to another legacy community this year. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Mark Sogi. I'm the Regional Director for Pacific Region for USGS. As several other people have mentioned, a lot going on, but I'm just going to cover a few highlights. In addition to executing, I think what'll be over $10 million of science that's funded by the agencies and partners around this table, we're going to be focusing this year on maintaining our network that we have in the Bay Delta area for hydrodynamics, sediment, water quality, all of those kinds of things. That's crucial for a lot of the day-to-day operations and underpins a lot of our understanding of what goes on in the Bay Delta. As Dan was talking about with regard to refuges, a high water year like this introduces interesting maintenance features to our scientific instruments as well. So we want to make sure that those are out there functioning and available for everybody. On top of the work that we do funded by partners, we implement about $1.5 million worth of USGS funded science. And so those are listed, this year's priorities are listed in your materials from the workshop or from the meeting here. I won't go into the details, just to say that in general, we try to fund with USGS dollars work that is synthesis, integration, modeling, sometimes horizon issues that have not yet hit the prime time from a management standpoint that we think are going to matter down the road. And you can see from the list that's in there in your packet what we have in store. And then the last thing that's in the list, I'll have two more quick ones beyond this, is orienting the new political appointees within the Department of the Interior. There's been a huge turnover, as everyone knows, from all the federal agencies, all the political appointees in every agency and bureau. And a lot of the Department of Interior political appointees are yet to be in place. They should be coming on board in the next few months, and we always, during transition, spend a lot of time bringing them up to speed on what the issues are. Secretary of Interior Zinke was here last Thursday at Cottage Way, and he spoke. And one of the things he told the regional directors that he met with first was it didn't take him long to realize that California water was going to be one of his major issues as Secretary of Interior. And so now, for us, from USGS standpoint, the challenge is to try to help him understand the complexity, the role that science plays, et cetera. Two other quick things that aren't on your materials, but we are working with the Delta Stewardship Council, supporting the Delta Lead Scientist recruitment effort. That's obviously a big priority for everybody this year. And we're also going to be taking part in the participating Operation Baseline, which we really commend Cliff for his great work and vision in recognizing the importance of being ready for that wastewater treatment center changeover. That's it.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Marcinkiewicz. I'm a branch chief with the Central Valley office of NOAA Fisheries here, and I'm sitting in for Barry Thom, our regional administrator, and Maria Ray, our assistant regional administrator. Maria sends her regards. She was unexpectedly called out of town, so I got to sit in today. We have a lot going on in our office, several priorities for this year. I'll go through a couple of them, but kind of the common thread through all of them is recovery. You know, we really try to keep the idea of the implementation of our recovery plans in mind when we're doing kind of our day-to-day work on the large projects and the small ones. And so, you know, our salmon recovery plan came out a few years ago. The co-manager draft of the green sturgeon recovery plan was released just a few weeks ago. So we've got kind of those updated and on the books, and we really want to use those to inform the efforts that we put forth in our office, you know, using various partnerships through our technical assistance, flood planning, coordinating on the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Recovery is really this nice common theme. Michelle and Dan both mentioned the reinitiation of consultation on long-term ops, or the ROC-ON, and so we're pretty highly engaged in that to the extent that we can be right now. Anticipating it really ramping up in a few months once we have a little more bandwidth and once the project progresses a bit more. That bandwidth will come with hopefully meeting this other priority of completing the biological opinion for the California water fix. That's a very high priority for our office right now. And we're really striving to get that done within the near future.
And part of that, or part of what was born from that, was the adaptive management framework. So we've, put our efforts into that framework, but we're also continuing with the process of kind of augmenting that, building on it to make sure that it's something that can be implemented with all the different parties kind of satisfied that this will be a plan that can work for what we need it to do. And part of both of those kind of have really highlighted to us the opportunity to really try to grapple with some of the monitoring issues that we've seen in doing these more scientific-oriented efforts. That we've identified a lot of gaps in the consultation processes, and we want to use the water fix biological opinion, the adaptive management framework as ways to identify and kind of collate some of these different monitoring activities to say, what is it that we need to know, especially for these more long-term operations, and how can we jump on that now? So we're working hard to try to further that. We do still have the regular day-to-day management associated with the existing biops, be it a wet year or dry year or otherwise. That, that is a daily priority in our office, as is the collaborative science that's behind that and trying to improve those operations and management decisions. And then finally, kind of bringing it back to the idea of our recovery ideals, really working through our efforts. We do have as high priorities of reintroduction throughout the system, be it the reintroduction above Shasta, the Battle Creek Restoration Plan, reintroduction of fish into the San Joaquin River, and some efforts on the Yuba as well. So those are the various, just a few of the priorities within our office, so they're the major efforts right now.
Thank you, Felicia. Carl Wilcox, a policy advisor to the director for the Delta, sitting in for Chuck Bonham, who couldn't be here today. He sends his regrets. In your packet, there were 2 items that were identified. I just want to touch on those really briefly, in that the department made its selections of grants for the current fiscal year back in December. It awarded $40 million worth of grants to 44 projects statewide. Many of those were in the watershed of the Delta, and provided for habitat improvement or planning or meadow restoration in the watershed. 7 projects totaling $12 million were funded within the Delta. There is a specific Delta cutout within Prop 1, and we fund approximately $7 million a year, although we had some additional money that was provided by the legislature to supplement our grant program this year. So that's why you see a higher number there. 3 of those projects were for planning or implementation of restoration actions. One of them for the Yola Wildlife Area to improve drainage to anticipate future management needs. That was a substantial amount of money that was awarded to that, $4+ million. That goes along with money that the Conservancy provided for the same activity last year, which primarily went to planning. This goes primarily to implementation. We also supplemented funds that were granted by the Conservancy last year for the Paradise Cut project to acquire easements for floodplain restoration as part of flood planning and implementation in the lower San Joaquin River. And then an actual restoration project a little bit outside of what is considered the Delta and Suisun Marsh at the mouth of Pacheco Creek and Walnut Creek, which is a project that the Contra Costa County Public Works Department is doing as part of their flood project there to improve habitat. But it fit to the objectives of what we're trying to accomplish in the Delta, and technically it's part of Suisun Bay and what we would consider the upper estuary. We also awarded 4 grants for science in the Delta. Prop 1, this vehicle for Delta granting gives us the opportunity to fund science. It's the only program within Prop 1 that provides for that. So it's an important thing and recognizes the importance of ongoing science development and improving our understanding in the Delta to support future management. One of those was looking at factors affecting longfin smelt abundance, which is a key species. It's state listed only, but is something that a species along with Delta smelt that's teetering. And the more we can learn, the better we can look to manage and or regulate activities that affect it. Also looking at climate and water quality as it affects cyanobacteria in the Delta. And then salmon smolt migration within the lower San Joaquin River. And then contaminant effects on resident native fish and the food web they just rely on. So this augments grants that were provided in 2015-16, which was the first year of the program. So we've funded at this point probably $8 or $9 million worth of science grants within the Delta, and we have worked closely to align those with the science action agenda and the science priorities that are within the Delta Science Plan, and also worked with the science program to coordinate our activities with theirs, and where we can't fund a project, potentially they can pick up something that has been funded by the department. So there's close coordination going on there. And additionally, this year we engaged with our other fishery agents and management partners in providing in the evaluation of the proposals that were submitted to us. So we're trying to improve that coordination as we go forward so that we're achieving goals that are common to all of our interests. The current solicitation process is in the beginning phases. We are conducting workshops statewide in preparation for the 2017-18 round, which we would expect to go out for proposals on concurrent with that with the new fiscal year. The department tries to get its process done within the first 6 months of the fiscal year so that we can get things rolling by the end of the fiscal year. So there's a high emphasis on having things ready in advance. The other thing that was in your packet related to the Delta Conservation Framework, Christina Sloop and Brooke Jacobs presented to you, who are in the audience today, presented at the last meeting. We continue to work on that. We completed our workshops in the Delta, I think proximal to the last DPIIC meeting, and now Christina primarily has been locked away in a room writing. And she's starting to get products out for review by some of our advisory folks who are representative from other agencies, local government, and that, just so we get a first look at the draft products. We expect a draft framework document probably in July that would be out for public review. We're planning a couple of workshops in the Delta to take input and work on revising that in an iterative way, and probably looking at having the framework optimistically done sometime in the fall. I just wanted to comment that we continue to actively engage, as has been identified by many of the committee members, to work collaboratively, particularly in the development and implementation of the smelt resiliency strategy, the developing salmon resiliency strategy. We're working closely with DWR, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the Resources Agency to put that together. We're also, as Kathy mentioned, really working to get the adaptive management framework for the existing biological opinions and water fix completed and ready so it can be included within the biological opinions and our permits for the project. So, there's lots going on in that arena, as well as the department's actively involved in the water storage investment program and providing input to the Water Commission on the biological aspects of that. So that's a significant demand, along with other things that our program, particularly in what our water branch, are focused on. I also wanted to highlight that the Fish and Game Commission, the Wildlife Committee, will be holding an information workshop to discuss issues around predators in the Delta and predator management. That will be on the 24th of May and is, I think, scheduled for the afternoon. There will be presentations by a panel of state entities providing their perspective, the Water Board, DWR, Stewardship Council, and the department, and then an open forum with the commissioners and the audience. So that should be entertaining, if nothing else. So with that, I think I'll close my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Felicia Marcus with the State Water Board. I'll just mention a few things that are priorities, some of which just match an update of what we talked about last time. Obviously, the biggest thing in front of us is the water quality control plans, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 being the Lower San Joaquin and Southern Delta salinity standards. That is in process since the our last meeting. We've held a variety of public hearings, and the comment period has closed, and staff has been going over all the comments and thinking about revisions, but also responses to the comments. At the same time, we proceeded on moving our scientific basis report draft through both public workshops and independent science panel review, and now on to blind peer review at UC Berkeley. We anticipate receiving that at some point and proposing on Phase 2, which is the Sacramento, the Delta proper interior flows, outflow, as well as a variety of the interior requirements sometime this summer. And so we anticipate closing on the Phase 1 another time this summer, and try to conclude Phase 2 by the end of this year. It's an aggressive schedule, but it is Bay Delta year. Now that the drought is over, now that we've ended the drought, all of us collectively, at least this drought. So we're very much engaged on all of that, as well as in parallel with Resources Agency-led settlement discussions, and hoping a lot happens and a lot of conversations around the suite of Bay Delta issues, and hopefully we can do something really significant this year. So it is Bay Delta year for all of us, but especially us this year. We're also continuing the water fix hearings. We'll be starting rebuttal next week on Phase 1, and we will start Phase 2, which is the fish and wildlife portion, sometime after the consultation is done from the fish agencies and the EIS is certified. The other thing we're working on, it's in your report, is following on the SB 88 reporting rules. The measurement rules start taking effect this month. There are different timelines for folks to be dealing with, but as highlighted in the write-up, we've been taking a particular focus through the Delta Water Master in the Delta, including the consumptive use study and the like. I think through the course of this drought, if there was one highest priority for us that we doubled down on, it was just getting better data and better information, which is of a piece of what we've been talking about together, but really figuring out how to get basic data in some uniform way where we lay a foundation for having the conversations around resources that sometimes devolve into people talking past each other and people having all their own sets of facts about what's really happening. So this data effort that we've all been on, I think, is at core part of what we're doing together, and there's a whole suite of things that we're doing, particularly in the Delta, that I'm sure Michael George would be happy to report on if we decide to make it a specific agenda item at some point, but a lot of time on that. We're also planning, as mentioned in the report, spend a lot of time on drought lessons learned. We found that very helpful as well in the past, and the dry year report from the drought in the 70s and the 90s, both of those helped us a lot. In this drought, we did an interim one in 2015, and we'll be working on doing that as we usually do with a public draft in the summer and comments, and I just bring it up so that we can figure out how to coordinate well together, along with the governor's request that all of the agencies do a lessons learned update as part of his most recent executive order. And so we have a lot of coordination work to do to just make sure we don't have colliding reports. We may have different levels of depth on the different issues that we all work on most often, but I think we should be spending an awful lot of time together talking about those lessons learned so that every single one of those documents is as good as it can possibly be, because everyone obviously needs us to be as good as we possibly can be moving forward. Also, since the last report, the water boards joined CSAMP and CAMP, which many of the other agencies are a part of. Thank you, whoever's idea it was to invite us. That's been very productive and feeds into some of our conversations today. I'm still catching up on some of the language and some of the issues that others have been at the table on for a long time, but I really appreciate us being included in that effort, which we weren't before. And then finally, even though it's not necessarily directly around the Delta, it is something that both Undersecretary Burns and I talked about last time, is that with the declaration of the drought being over, the governor coupled that with a rollout of the long-term efficiency report, which I think was either just out in draft, or I can't remember when the draft first came out. When we had our last meeting, we were talking about the draft, I think. And so that's now out, includes updates to the ag water management planning process, but a lot on urban water management planning. There's legislation that has been proposed, so that'll be a big focus of ours sort of statewide in terms of how we use water more wisely for the future, and happy to talk about that more with anyone who's interested. Did I miss anything, Gordon? Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Fiorini, members of the committee and public. My name is Ami Gunasekara, Science Advisor to Secretary Ross. I'm filling in for her today. She is expected to be here, so we'll see about that. There's two programs we'd like to provide an update, really because they apply to farmers and ranchers and others in the Delta. The first is the Healthy Soils Incentives Program. In 2016, we received $7.5 million to set up an incentive program to incentivize farmers and ranchers to implement management practices that sequester carbon. The funds are from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and so they have to reduce greenhouse gases, and we're tying that into carbon sequestration and management practices. We are in the framework development process, so the program hasn't been implemented yet. We hope to roll out the program in the summer of this year. We are working through the Environmental Farming Act Science Advisory Panel that Secretary Ross brought together again in 2012. It's part of the Canela Environmental Farming Act of 1995. And this group is really a science-based body that provides technical and framework feedback to our programs and new incentive environmental-based programs that we create in the department. The meetings are open to the public, and we encourage the public to attend. We have had 2 meetings so far, the last one on March 16th. And the next meeting will be on May 18th, 2017, and CDFA in the main auditorium on 1220 N Street. We really value participation and public input in these. This program is part of the larger Healthy Soils initiative. The governor had some language on the initiative in the 2015 budget. We didn't get any money for that program yet, but we started working with other agencies to really try to figure out how healthy soils can benefit some of the things they're working on. For example, sediment erosion into waterways, and you can imagine what departments might be interested in that. So a lot of interest from a lot of departments, and we meet about every 2 months to figure out how we can be part of this initiative and movement of building healthy soils that has many, many benefits. The other program we have included in the binder is the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program. This program was initiated as part of the emergency drought measures in 2014. Consequently, it's been part of the budget of 2015 and 16 since then. We received $67.5 million into that program since 2014, and we are oversubscribed by about 300% each time. It's a popular program. It's also funded from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and it has to reduce greenhouse gases. The program is designed to provide financial incentives for California ag operations to invest in irrigation systems that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for example, moving to an efficient drip or micro-sprinkler system from other techniques such as flood and furrow to bringing efficiencies to their pump. I should say both of these programs, including the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program that's been around since 2014, go through scientific technical review through the California State University and University of California programs. And I think we're going to work with Jessica on figuring out how many projects actually near the Delta or around the Delta for the sweep and the Healthy Soils program. So thank you.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. So I actually have a couple items that haven't been mentioned yet, since I'm going last. But as you can imagine, I should introduce myself, right? Yes, sorry, Cindy Messer. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the Department of Water Resources, and I'm sitting in today for our Acting Deputy, Bill Croyle, who does send his apologies for not being able to attend today. Obviously, we have a few very high-profile, high-priority items that we are addressing right now, as probably everybody in this room knows. The work that's being done up in Oroville in terms of our emergency response work, and then moving into the recovery for the spillway, both the emergency spillway and the auxiliary spillway. We've also been very, very focused on flood fighting efforts through the winter season, and that will continue, obviously, through the spring, given the weather whiplash and all of the atmospheric rivers and all of the activity that we're seeing this year and record rainfall amounts. And then we also had a little incident at Clifton Court Forebay that kind of took us offline for a little bit, but kudos to all of the crew and our team that came together to get that resolved, and we're back online and have that issue resolved. So maybe what I want to say is in light of all of these items that are going on and will continue, especially with Oroville and some of the flood fighting through a good portion of this year, we've really made a very concerted effort to look at all of the other priorities, many of which have been mentioned around this table by various folks here. And, you know, we are on tap to continue with our efforts and focusing on those priorities. And I won't go through all of them because, again, they've been mentioned, but some of the really kind of high-level and shorter timeline ones include the Cal Water fix, moving through the regulatory and permitting processes around that. Restoration efforts, so obviously we have our current biological opinions and the requirements under that, and we have a heavy focus on working with David Okita, with Chris, with our EcoRestore folks to get those projects completed and implemented, so that's a big ticket item, and I know we'll hear a lot more about that later. The reinitiation on consultation for long-term ops is also another very big ticket item for the department. Science support, I know there's been a lot of really good dialogue already, and I know we'll hear more around groups like the CSAMT, the Interagency Ecological Program, or the IEP, the Delta Science Program. So many of our staff continue to be engaged in all of those meetings and the efforts around that those groups are undertaking. And I think I'll maybe wrap up with the Delta Smelt Resiliency Strategy and the Developing Salmon Resiliency Strategy. We've been a key part in those efforts, and those kind of feed into a lot of different tasks and efforts that folks here at the table are involved in, from the biological opinions to some of the other activities that are going on. So lots going on. It's going to be a very, very busy year, but again, we're really trying to take a half step back. That's largely been my role so far, is to try and kind of make sure that once we have Oroville and some of those efforts, you know, they're being staffed, they have high priority. We're making sure that we turn to everything else we need to be doing for the year, and so we'll have success stories all the way around. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And finally, to the Delta Stewardship Council, let me first introduce three of my colleagues. In addition to Skip, we have Vice Chair Susan Tatayan in the back, Judge Frank Damrell, and Senator Patrick Johnston, retired, with us. Thank you, lady and gentlemen. I'm going to refer you to the insert in your binder listing all the activities of the Delta Stewardship Council, and only highlight three important activities in the interest of time. One is, well, actually all three are amendments to the Delta Plan. The first is levee investment strategy. We've been working with the Department of Water Resources, Central Valley Flood Protection Board to coordinate our efforts. That product is just about ready to go to CEQA. We are providing guidance for conveyance, storage, and operations in an effort to try and identify needs and opportunities, and to knit together recommendations that show how integrating storage and conveyance, particularly as it was mentioned earlier about the need for conjunctive use. So we're doing our best to create a patchwork quilt of recommendations that will help to provide for more reliable water supply. And then finally, the Stewardship Council uses performance measures to gauge how effective our long-term legally enforceable management plan is working. And there are some revisions and updates to the performance measures that are underway. We hope to wrap that up soon. In the interest of time, Jessica, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that we need your help from. Two products that are up and running on our website. One is the list of administrative performance measures. Those are products and due dates that some of your agencies have responsibilities for. Those are in need of updating. And so we're asking for you to identify one person. Jessica Law will be following up with you with the appropriate agencies to identify someone in your agency that can help bring those up to date. And then also DeltaView, which has been a huge effort on the part of our staff to feature all of the projects and plans that are underway in the Delta and the associated funding and spending. Those are in need of some your look and review. So we'll be in contact with you soon on that. That concludes the round the table report. Does anyone have any questions of anyone else? All right, then I'm going to summarize, and I think I share the opinions of those of you around this table. That's an impressive list of activities. And compared to when we began in April of 2013, this group has grown in great terms. I'm so impressed with the amount of, not only the amount of work that's going on, but the amount of interaction that's occurring among our agencies. And for those of you that are here observing, I hope you're encouraged too that your state and federal partners are working diligently to improve conditions in the Delta and for the state of California. So with that, let's move on to agenda item number 3. And Jessica will remain seated at the presenters table, and joining her will be David Okita, Director of Ecosystem Restoration for the California Natural Resources Agency, and Chris Tjernell is changing seats. He's appointed as the Special Assistant for Water Policy at the California Natural Resources Agency. We are now about to hear a presentation from David and Chris from the Natural Resources Agency on the status of California EcoRestore and key recommendations from the Interagency Review of Permitting Barriers and Best Practices. We want you to join in a conversation after their presentation. And this is an ongoing commitment that we have made to EcoRestore and the YOLO partnership work to feature progress. The progress that's been accomplished thus far is historic, and they have even greater aspirations in the next year. So with that, who would like to lead off?
I'm going to start. Thank
David,
you.
welcome.
Just to remind you, California EcoRestore has 3 components to it. Projects, in-the-ground restoration projects, longer-term planning, which Campbell and Carl mentioned, and also adaptive management, which I'll talk a little bit about. We're starting a program there. Targets. We have a goal the governor set a few years ago of 30,000 acres of restoration in the Delta and the Suisun Marsh. Our literature has different categories for specific targets. I won't go into those. But there are 3 basic areas, tidal and subtidal, mostly to meet the biological opinion for Delta smelt. Floodplain management, a lot of benefit to salmonid species. And managed wetlands, which are not subject to tidal action, but are throughout the Delta, particularly in Sherman and Twitchell Islands and places like that. And we also have fish passage improvements, which Chris will be talking about in some detail. I want to focus in your packet is, I think on the second page, a little map that kind of shows you the detail of where these projects are in the Delta and the marsh, what types of projects they are, and rough timetables of when we think they're going to be implemented. So you could look at that in your leisure to look at the whole scope. But I wanted to focus on the near-term projects. These are projects we hope to start construction this year and next year. So you can see there's quite a few of them here. I should caution you, each of these have some problems that we're actively dealing with to try and get them done. So there's a good chance that some of these may slip a year, but optimistically, this is what we plan to get the permitting done and actually break ground in these 2 years. And here's that map that I mentioned before. In addition to those projects that I shown for 2017 and 2018, we recently did a request for proposals for tidal wetland projects. These are projects, again, to meet the Delta smelt biological opinion. DWR budgeted $42.5 million for these projects, and the goal was to engage the private sector to help us provide these projects. DWR and some other agencies are working to come up with 8,000, but we're not going to meet the deadline unless we get some outside help. So we put out an RFP. We got 6 responses. Very pleased with that. DWR noticed an intent to award 2 projects, one in Cache Slough and one in the Suisun Marsh. And as soon as they go through the contracting process, which will take a couple of months, we'll be able to provide you with a lot more detail on those projects. Some of the projects, the other 4, are good projects. They didn't quite meet the requirements of the massive paperwork requirement of the state. So we're going to do another RFP, hopefully later this year, where those projects and possibly others will have another chance to submit proposed projects. But we're fairly confident that this process is going to result in a substantial amount of the 8,000 acres that we're going to need for Delta smelt. Adaptive management is also an important part of our program. We're spending a lot of money building these projects, and we need to know how well they work and what types of projects should be invested in the future with money coming in a little bit later. So we are working on an adaptive management program for these restoration projects, again, in the Delta and the marsh. This is not the bigger Delta-wide adaptive management that some of you are working on, but when we're done, we plan to merge very efficiently into that larger process. But because these projects are going in the ground right now, we need to get the monitoring program and adaptive management program going. Many of your agencies are directly participating in our efforts. In your folder is a white paper that outlines what we plan to do. The Delta Stewardship Council has generously provided part of Lauren Hastings' time to help coordinate this effort. So I'm going to be helping her in establishing the program. We've got work groups, which many of your agencies are participating in, to do some of the short-term actions to get this going. And Laura and I will be developing a budget for longer-term staffing and funding needs. Because once you do adaptive management, it needs to be done in perpetuity, because these projects sometimes take decades to prove out how they work. So we're excited to get started on that. Lauren and I did a presentation before the Independent Science Board because we are using the Delta Science Program model for adaptive management. They were very pleased that we are implementing their recommendations, and they offered to review our white paper and provide some comments to help us along, and may also provide comments as we start to implement the program. Chris is now going to talk about some of his projects.
So again, Chris Tjernell with the California Resources Agency, California Natural Resources Agency. Just want to start out by saying that I definitely appreciate the continued interest by this committee in Yola bypass projects. This is obviously not the entire suite of efforts that are happening, as David mentioned, but I think that they do deserve this kind of attention. They've been on the books and required for quite a while now. It's a pretty challenging landscape, as all these areas are, to get good projects done. So I just wanted to say thanks again for the continued interest in hearing some more specifics about some of these particular projects. One that I have talked about several times now, probably over the last couple years, been provided 6-month updates on, is the Wallace Weir project. This is a fish passage project. It prevents adult salmon from straying into agricultural waterways on their way back through the Yola bypass, across the Fremont Weir back into the Sacramento River main stem. It is a requirement of the 2009 NIMS biological opinion for the state and Central Valley water projects. We got this thing to 95% complete, and that is construction 95% complete last year, after essentially getting through permitting and planning and that 95% of construction in a single year. So a pretty extraordinary effort, and I like to trot it out and talk about it, not only because it's almost done, and since for all intents and purposes it is done, it will be finished this summer. It is an example of pretty extraordinary interagency coordination, and a lot of the agencies that are represented around this table, if not all of them, had some role or another in making that happen. So we didn't quite finish it last year. The rains did come, as we all know, and we had to, we being Reclamation District 108, so not really we at all, but our local partner who led this effort on the ground with our assistance, had to get a lot of equipment out of the way because this flood project is actually in, or this fish passage project rather, is in a floodway. It's in the Yola bypass. So we had to cut it a little bit short, but look forward to coming back this summer and finishing it out. This is a picture of it from the air, obviously, in its 95% completed state. So there's a control building up there on the left-hand side of the picture. This is where all the controls are for all the hydraulic equipment and whatnot that needs to be fully functional to allow for various gates, weirs to move up and down. And there's also a state-of-the-art fish rescue facility that you can't really see very well on the far right-hand side of the picture. So again, both to block fish passage to where they shouldn't be, but also to collect the fish in a safe, secure way once they get there so we can return them to the river as necessary. Another big project that I've talked about several times but is making really good progress along the same lines as the Wallace Weir project is the Fremont Weir Adult Fish Passage project. There is an existing fish ladder in the Fremont Weir. It's about 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, which is, turns out, not useful for a lot of the fish that want to and that are there and that would otherwise want to take advantage of that. Namely sturgeon. Salmon, you give them most of the way there, and they can for the most part, assist themselves the rest of the way. Sturgeon, a little bit more slow, a little bit more cumbersome, and they like a little bit slower moving water in different conditions. And so this project is to take that existing 4 by 6 foot fish ladder, make it a little bit wider, a little bit deeper, for the benefit of winter run, spring run salmon, and like I just mentioned, sturgeon. All 3 of which are listed and requirements again of the biological opinion efforts, or drivers rather of the biological opinion efforts. So this project is very similar to Wallace Weir effort in that we are essentially taking it knock on particle board from planning through permitting through construction in a single year. Another aspect of this project that you can kind of see on that map over there is that we will also be taking out an existing agricultural road crossing that's no longer useful for the agricultural community that impedes fish passage, and we'll also be removing and replacing a second agricultural road crossing with cement box culverts that are much more amenable for fish passage. And those efforts are all packaged together in a single project for the purposes of CEQA-NEPA. So again, hope to reach construction this year, and all signs suggest that we will be able to. And just really want to encourage your agency's continued involvement in this, and with that participation, I think that we can not go wrong here. Okay, this is the big project, if you will, the big kahuna, Yola Bypass Floodplain Restoration. That's not the official title, but the official title is kind of a little bit less interesting sounding and less descriptive. So this is the project that you hear about when you hear about the 17,000 plus acres of floodplain restoration in the Yola Bypass. And in that, of course, is more than half of EcoRestore's total targeted habitat restoration. So this is a project of tremendous importance, not only for achieving the objectives of EcoRestore, which themselves aren't necessarily a big deal, but for really helping the long-term health and recovery of the species that we're dealing with and we're trying to assist. So this whole project, again, just as a quick reminder, is to go far beyond the modification of a small fish ladder, but really to see, can we put a gated big notch facility, essentially a big gate facility in the Fremont Weir itself, that would probably have between 3,000 and 12,000 maximum cubic feet per second capacity, and in doing so, increase the frequency and the duration of floodplain inundation in the Yola Bypass, while at the same time, of course, making that actually a useful thing by bringing additional juvenile fish onto the bypass as well. So it's not just about bringing water onto the bypass, it's also about bringing the juvenile fish on as well. And in doing so, it will also facilitate adult fish passage going the other direction as they return from the ocean north of the Yola Bypass and back into the main stem of the Sacramento River across the Fremont Weir. This is a very big project. It's been, again, on the book since 2009, highly controversial, very challenging, technically, engineering-wise, just scientifically. We're breaking a lot of new ground here, right? There's a lot of the kind of things that we're doing haven't been done in a lot of places. And so this is really cutting-edge work. It's very exciting. And we're moving in May this year to administrative draft, EIR, EIS, public draft fall of this year with the hope of a record of decision or ROD-NOD by same time in 2018. Each of those 3 milestones is pretty extraordinary. And you'll see one of those slides that David put up there earlier. It was the projects that we expect to go to completion in 2017 in one column and in 2018, 2019 in the next column. The record of decision for this project was listed there as if it was a project in and of itself. But it certainly is a milestone in and of itself that will be pretty extraordinary to reach. Again, lots of challenges to getting there, design complexity, project scale. This is 17,000 plus acres of of enhanced floodplain habitat, and this isn't just a no man's land out there. This is two-thirds privately owned, one-third publicly owned, with active wildlife management, rice operations, other annual crops, grazing. The stakeholder outreach effort for this is extraordinary, and I should say that it will need to be extraordinary as we increase our efforts there. So a lot of good work to be done, but good stakeholder involvement to date, more needed, but I think that we will get there, absolutely. So those are the 3 EcoRestore projects I wanted to mention. There's a 4th project I wanted to mention that isn't EcoRestore per se. It is not exclusively a habitat project, and it's not generally discussed under the same framework as EcoRestore, but it is in the same general region. This is in the Yola Bypass, and it is a big multi-benefit flood risk reduction project called the Lower Elkhorn Basin Levee Setback Project. And I'm sorry I don't have a better map here. I should have included one to put this into more geographic context, but if you can imagine yourself, I don't know, suspended from a drone somewhere, looking west, you have the Sacramento River in front of you. You have the Sacramento Weir and the Sacramento Bypass in the middle there. And then you have the Yola Bypass in the distance. It looks far smaller than, of course, it is. North, of course, being pointed right there. So you're facing west. The whole idea here is to address several pressing needs. One is existing levee conditions in the Yola Bypass aren't great, to say the least. There are areas that need significant improvement. Climate change. We're expecting change in precipitation patterns, where we're expecting more precipitation, especially in the north part of the state, to come as rain, less as snow. Therefore, the Sacramento River and that whole system, flood control system, will have to deal with more water. So where does that water need to go? Well, it needs to go in our system of bypasses, because oftentimes the opportunities for flood improvements along the main stem are more limited. And also financing availability. The state has around $185 to $200 million available for this project, and we have to expend that in relatively short order. So all of this suggests that the time to act is now, and that's happening. And so 7+ miles of Yola Bypass levee, again, along both the Sacramento Weir to the north there, and then the eastern side of the Yola Bypass are proposed to be set back, and in doing so, protect agricultural interests there, of big importance, of course, to Yolo County, the landowners themselves, increase flood flow dynamics in the Yola Bypass, of course, is the primary reason from the state's perspective to be doing this, and also taking advantage of the opportunities for multi-benefit enhancements, right? We'll be adding 900 acres of agricultural lands that will remain productive back into the bypass. We're not going to be using riprap out there. We're going to be planting native grasses instead. Part of the existing levee is proposed at least to be remain in place. So we won't be moving the entire levee, thereby providing a little bit of upland refugia for terrestrial species. So lots of different aspects, that's just 3 of them, but of ways that we are truly taking the concepts that President Edgar mentioned of multi-benefit flood planning, and we're actually putting those into use. That is a big shift for the state, finally putting our money where our mouth is, if you will, and saying this is how we're going to be doing this on these large-scale flood projects. And it really, again, just wanted to discuss it today. It's just outside of the legal delta, and it's not EcoRestore per se, but a lot of the themes are right there, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. So, thank you.
Thank you, David and Chris. So committee members, I wanted to go over quickly results from the last meeting. So if you remember at the November 14th meeting of the DPIIC committee, after their presentation on the progress of the EcoRestore projects, there was a request to the committee members to assist with a review of the remaining EcoRestore projects and the project tracking matrix that was sent out after the meeting. So this project tracking matrix really lays out the schedule for the remaining projects on EcoRestore, looks at schedule and permitting, schedule for permitting, for design, bid and review, and for construction. So thanks to all of your agencies, we sent out a survey with these questions. So we asked simply, what are the barriers to project implementation for your agency? What are the actions that your agency can take to accelerate project implementation? What actions can other agencies take to accelerate project implementation? What's worked well in the past? And is it feasible to meet these timelines? So the results came back, and excuse me. And first I wanted to say thank you to all of the committee members. All of your agencies responded to the survey, which made it certainly robust. And we came out with a few just quick summary recommendations and results. So overall, number one, meeting the EcoRestore permitting schedule is feasible. So in general, the majority responded that you are able to meet the proposed EcoRestore permitting schedule as presented, especially if progress is made on some specific actions for acceleration. 2, inadequate staff time, incomplete or changing submittals, or other complications due to overlapping agency jurisdictions are challenges for projects. A key barrier that most of the survey responses identified was that staff were overloaded at permitting agencies. Some other challenges included complications in the project design phases due to overlapping jurisdictions and conflicting regulatory and mitigation requirements. 3, agencies are currently working on ways to reduce barriers to project implementation. So there are a lot of examples of successful management actions that have already taken place to improve timelines and assist with getting projects on the ground. Including prioritizing permitting, funding of positions at regulatory agencies, early and regular engagement by project managers, and while lack of long-term funding for operations, management, and monitoring of non-biological opinion projects was identified as a barrier, the majority of the EcoRestore projects have long-term funding through state and federal water contractors, and funding for the non-biological opinion projects has mostly been secured. So, and then lastly, there are additional actions that can be taken to accelerate project implementation. So agencies identified some actions for acceleration, including to fund additional staff, engage early and often with regulatory agencies, possibly considering regulatory roundtables or standardized design levels for corresponding consultation phases. Identify agency points of contact, identify programmatic mitigation opportunities, and standard key species mitigation requirements. And there were additional actions for acceleration that were identified. So in the report, there's a copy of it in your binder. We just identified a few next steps and really wanted to just go over this briefly and open it up for a committee discussion. But some of the next steps were, 1, to continue progress on implementation of the EcoRestore projects. It'll require a sustained level of coordination by the lead agencies and project proponents and permitting agencies. And 2, many of the agencies' responses address the long-term needs of the EcoRestore projects and some future restoration projects. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Randy just to open it up for discussion.
Okay, again, thank you all for responding to that survey. David, Chris, what do you need from DPIIC to further your efforts?
Well, one of the things that came out of the survey is there might be some benefit to do some programmatic or regional type permitting approaches. Now, those take time. Sometimes they take years. So for the base EcoRestore projects, we're basically just barreling through the permit process as best we can. But for the longer term, I think it makes a lot of sense to invest some time into this type of more programmatic type permitting. There are different levels of programmatic permitting. You know, you can do an HCP and an NCCP, which is very programmatic and takes a long time. You can do a programmatic biological opinion, like they have in the Suisun Marsh for restoration projects, which was very helpful in getting those projects done. Not totally, completely helpful, but very helpful. Another way is permitting strategies. We're working one on giant garter snake right now, where there's a lot of different agencies involved in giant garter snake requirements and different public agencies as applicants. And there's some friction between the two about what the requirements are and how they should be mitigated and things like that. So we're having a roundtable that may result in a permitting strategy. And all your agencies, if we embark in this effort, are going to need to be involved in investing the time to maybe make future permitting a little bit easier. So, those are some of the things I think we can start on.
Anybody like to respond to that suggested need? Oh, come on. It's got to be somebody here that has a thought about that. Felicia?
Well, I just think as with the follow-on that happened from the two earlier, DPIIC means the best thing is just to pick the issues that you think it could be most helpful on in terms of which things you feel like you're getting cookie cutter. I don't know if it's some of the mercury issues that we've got a point person to deal with for the permitting, but almost anything can be a candidate for that. I would just suggest talking to whichever of us as agencies you think it might be profitable to have that conversation with. We're always up for that.
Chris?
Yeah, if I could just say something to that point. It's been remarkably helpful just knowing that there have been, in some cases, I think in many of your agency's cases, identified points of contact. So Phil Crater, for example, has been remarkably useful, and what just finished back at my office that I wasn't able to make today was a meeting between Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Water Resources, the Regional Water Board, and State Water Board staff on mercury issues related to these projects, both biological opinion driven on the habitat side, but also the flood projects. And it sounds simple, but even having those points of contact has been remarkably useful in being able to just reach resolution. And especially when those points of contact have been entrusted with a degree of decision-making authority and ability that facilitates that.
So I think the purpose of this discussion was to highlight this for the highest level of agency leadership, so that if you do get a call from David or Chris or Jessica asking for some help, it won't be a strange concept to you or a foreign description of a need. So, anything else on this topic?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Skip.
I may make a couple comments. I appreciate the presenter's perspective on EcoRestore, but one of the things that I think is missing in this discussion, has been for many years, is local involvement. As David looked around the room, he talked about all the agency involvement, but what Jessica in her presentation failed to recognize is local government. That is a problem that we've had for many years, is that the state agencies move ahead with their effort on this particular program, and they fail to take into account how this project is going to affect, and I will speak for Solano County and Yolo County because I know them best, how it's going to affect agriculture. I mean, the 30,000 acres that David is talking about are predominantly in Solano and Yolo County. And, let's be honest, when you convert 30,000 acres that is productive ag, you've impacted the local agricultural community, you've impacted local government, because the state's position on the PILT program is not very good. They suspended it. And if the state takes all this land in and doesn't pay local government for the loss of property tax, that is a huge impact. Property taxes are a major source of discretionary revenues. And to Chris's comments about successful projects, I think they've been successful because local government was involved, and they really were a equal partner when it came to these projects. So as we move along with the EcoRestore, I would hope that we would keep in mind local government's perspective. And I'll be honest and quite blunt, the state's way of addressing EcoRestore is to go in and buy parcels, individual parcels, making those agricultural parcels left really non-farmable because of the inability for that farmer to use his land appropriately given what is surrounding it. So I'm just hoping that you all listen to local government and listen to what we have. We know our agricultural communities better than anyone, but we haven't been listened to. And so I just felt I needed to comment on this presentation because Dave and Chris have heard this before from me and my colleagues on the DCC. and we would like to be listened to and be part of what we think is a part of the discussion and part of the solution. So thank you. Mr. Chair, thanks.
Jessica?
Supervisor Thompson, when we went through the survey results, when we went through the survey, Eric Fink was actually very helpful in forwarding that to some of the local government representatives to let them know that we were doing this and we were reviewing all the projects. So we appreciate his role and help in reaching out to some of the local planning agencies. And we're happy to go back and try and make more of a direct connection following this meeting, if that would be helpful. Okay.
Thank you. Anything else on this matter? Jessica? Nothing? Okay, then that concludes agenda item number 3. I think we should just move right along and take up agenda item 4 as Dave Mooney comes to the presenters table to join Jessica. I'll ask Jessica to provide you with an overview of this agenda item and what we hope to accomplish.
All right. Thank you. So at the last few meetings, we've spent a lot of time and had presentations from Delta Independent Science Board on various topics related to best available science. But we thought because there's so much going on that we would cover these, just a few highlights really quickly. So I'll ask Cliff Dahm to cover a few items on the High Impact Science Actions List, which was endorsed by the DPIIC committee about 2 years ago, and then also the Draft Science Action Agenda. I'll talk a little bit about the Science Enterprise Workshop and the proceedings report that came out of that, and then we'll hand it over to Dave Mooney to talk about the proposal.
So I just wanted to speak briefly to the High Impact Science Agenda. This was something that the DPIIC committee basically tasked some of your scientists and some of your science managers to come together with the Delta Agency Science Work Group and develop a list of high impact science needs in the short term. I think there was a very long list of close to 550 of these actions that were initially collated and synthesized and then put into some topic areas and brought back to you. And these topic areas then we've been trying to move forward with both the scoping and the implementation of these 9 topic areas. There's a graph in the binder that summarizes those. I just wanted to say a few things about where we are on some of these. You've already heard from me about the drought effect synthesis, and we heard from Felicia that some other efforts related to summarizing drought effects and how to prepare for future droughts is something that we should probably continue to engage on as a multi-agency team, because I think a lot of us have experiences that would be germane to that. We also had an area where we were focusing efforts on trying to come up with real-time decision support tools and evaluating their effectiveness, and we're going to hear about at least a decision support tool coming up here later on in the presentation. We also had topics on things like pre-restoration monitoring, and certainly I look at the operation baseline in some ways as being a pre-plant upgrade monitoring. That's one example of something that's gone on. There have been 3 areas I think where there's been considerable amount of progress made, and I want to highlight those: the Shasta Reservoir temperature modeling and forecasting. A lot of effort now to try to improve our ability to model temperature, and we've seen how important that is when we do get into drought and high temperature issues relative to the reservoirs. We also have made a lot of progress on a salmon life cycle model review that NIMS has been very much engaged with. We also have identified a number of resources to do some collaborative funding of research through the SAIL project, which is the Salmon Steelhead Sturgeon Assessment Indicators of Life Stages. That's the acronym. We've also, through the Interagency Ecological Programs MAST program, which stands for Management, Analysis, and Synthesis Team, And then we've heard quite a bit around the table about CAMPT, about the Collaborative Adaptive Management Team. Some projects have been identified through that process and now funded and are ongoing. And then also the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. So these are some examples of where people have come together collaboratively to begin to fund some of these high impact areas that have been identified. In addition, the Prop 1 competition that Carl Wilcox talked about has certainly used some of these topic areas as the theme areas in their proposal solicitation package, and resources have gone to people that are starting to work on some of these high impact science action agenda items through their new projects. And the Delta Science Program over the last 3 years, each year has run a Sea Grant Delta Science Fellows Program for predoctoral and postdoctoral students. And I think over those 3 years, we've funded about 25 predoctoral and doctoral students to work on these theme areas. So that's kind of a quick update as to where we are on the high impact science agenda. Did you want me to then just progress right into another effort that we're engaged in, and we want to request, well, we've already received a lot of help, and we'd like to request ongoing help from the people around the table, and that is the development of the 2017 to the 2021 Science Action Agenda. This is an effort that was laid out in the Delta Science Plan that was adopted right at the end of 2013. Pragmatically, that's one of the reasons that we're moving down that pathway is to actually come up with this science action agenda for the next 5 years. But we also have used this as an opportunity to talk to the agencies and their scientists and many of the science managers working in the system to try to come up with a document that most of us can have reasonable buy-in. And the example that I have utilized when I've promoted this to some of the science groups and science managers group is that I spent a stint back in the 90s as a program director at the National Science Foundation. I watched certain science groups get very well organized and come up with a very clear list of things that they felt were important and come to the agency and also ultimately to Congress and get those funded. So the astronomers, the oceanographers, the physicists were quite good at that. The geoscientists, the biologists, the engineers, not quite so good at doing that. And this is an opportunity for maybe those of us who work on the science writ large within the Delta to come together with some ideas that hopefully will have some level of consensus that we can sell to potential funding agencies. So the document, the draft of that document was put out for public review last Monday on April 10th. It'll be available for public review through May 10th. We also have asked the Delta Independent Science Board to also provide a review, and they will be reviewing the document over the next 60 days or so. So we're going to get those levels of reviews, and then after the input from the public and from the Independent Science Board, we will refine and revise and hopefully finalize that sometime this summer. So that's where we are on the science action agenda.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give an update on progress that we've been making since the Science Enterprise Workshop last November 1st and 2nd. If you remember, the original idea for the workshop came from this committee. So it was a question: how do we raise the level of recognition and funding for the Delta on par with some of the other nationally recognized systems like the Everglades or Chesapeake Bay? Mike Chakowski from USGS offered to help and bring in expertise from around the country to better understand how collaborative science programs are being supported and implemented in these systems. So in very short order, we pulled together an excellent team and recruited nationally recognized experts to come and spend a few days here in the Delta, and many of you also participated in that workshop, to come and talk about how collaborative science can be better managed, funded, and communicated. We presented the results of this workshop at the last DPIIC meeting, and then the committee provided direction on two fronts. So one, you endorsed a set of recommendations from the Science Enterprise Workshop as guiding principles, meaning that there was agreement that effective science enterprises have the following characteristics. They use integrated modeling and forecasting to support decision-making, peer review or over-the-shoulder review processes. They are able to clearly communicate the importance of scientific findings to broad audiences, whether that's elementary school students or Congress members alike. They integrate social sciences into research programs. They have a willingness to do adaptive management. They use competitive science funding to attract the best and the brightest, and there's a clear leadership and decision-making structure with the responsibility at the highest level. We also promised at the last meeting to complete a proceedings report from the workshop to be delivered to you at this meeting, and I'm happy to say there's some copies over there. We've also posted it online. It's 180 pages. It's an abridged transcript, as I'm calling it. But really what it does is it shows you the depth and the breadth of conversation that happened at the workshop. For those of you that were at the meeting, you understand how engaging it was. And we have been impressed with the enthusiasm for the concepts that have continued to percolate after the meeting. With that, we are continuing to work on an additional outcomes and recommendations report that will synthesize some of the key findings. And in fact, our co-host, Mike Chakowski, is in Florida today and tomorrow and is actually giving a keynote address at an Everglades conference similar to our Bay Delta Science Conference and State of the Estuary Conference, along with Steve Brandt, a member of the Delta Independent Science Board, to talk about recommendations and what happened at the Science Enterprise Workshop. So at the last meeting, we also committed to getting started on some key early initiatives, specifically to develop a proposal for improved integrated ecosystem modeling. We've spent some time over the past few months to better understand the status of integrated ecosystem modeling here in the Delta. And then I just wanted to provide you with a little bit of additional background that maybe we skipped over quickly at the last meeting. And then I'll happily turn it over to Dave Mooney to talk more about the structured decision-making process. So here's what we've learned a little bit about the status of integrated ecosystem modeling in the Delta. One, significant work has already been done to understand and further the state of art on integrated ecosystem modeling. In the 2016 State of Bay Delta Science, the authors noted that there had been significant advancements in multidimensional models. In fact, it was included just as a few paragraphs in the 2008 version of State of Bay Delta Science and had an entire chapter devoted to it in 2016. In the policymaker synthesis of that document, the authors encouraged that we should invest now to develop models of the Delta ecosystem analogous to global climate models that more fully integrate the physical, ecological, and social sciences. So in 2015, many of you may remember this, the Delta Stewardship Council, National Science Foundation, along with the UC Davis Center for Watershed Sciences, USGS, California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum, and others supported a workshop on integrated ecosystem modeling in the Delta. We've included a copy of the policy briefing report that just came out recently. It identifies some best practices and recommendations and really describes the core problem that we're facing here. Estuaries involve many processes, objectives, disciplines, and interests, which we all know, and that makes analysis difficult, both technically and institutionally. Modeling frameworks are helpful for understanding these individual processes and for organizing information. So it's also the very act of constructing these models that usually reveals that there are important things about the systems that we're studying that we don't understand to model well enough. So the effort to create an integrated model often gives us a to-do list of fieldwork that targets unknowns or uncertainties identified as being important by that modeling effort. So developing integrated models can be useful not only to organize our knowledge and help answer management questions, but it's also useful to help us better understand what we don't know. Two, agencies are developing and working on models that further link biological, chemical, geological, and physical processes. These agencies, your agencies, are making significant advancements to better understand the linkages within the system. Just a few quick examples from the Delta Stewardship Council. We've been making this type of investment and work a priority over the past few months. So we've hired a modeling liaison, Ben Geske, who's in the audience. Ben. We've also released a few RFQs and some contracts on work, like the Sassoon Marsh biogeochemical modeling, integrated modeling related to tidal dynamics, and, as Cliff mentioned earlier, operation baseline. We're also supporting work on developing a model to better understand and calculate rates of primary production with our partners USGS and the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And there's also other examples from your own agencies. And Campbell mentioned earlier work that's going on cache slew to support decision-making and landscape scale scenario planning, and he can talk a little bit more about that. Three, and this is important, progress on integrated modeling is not primarily a technical challenge. It's driven by the ability to work collaboratively and to identify key management questions. The primary recommendation coming from the NSF workshop and resulting policy brief is a need for a more collaborative approach to modeling, one that allows agencies, consultants, and academics alike to work together, to meet together on a more regular basis to discuss the state of the art. Whether that's a physical or a virtual space, there's a need to really bring together the best and the brightest on this to solve problems and provide some science-based guidelines for policymakers and decision makers. So we learned at the Science Enterprise Workshop that many regions like Chesapeake and the Florida Everglades have employed these collaborative approaches, and it's really greatly improved their management actions as a result. The proposal from the Bureau is an example of a pilot study that can implement many of the concepts that we learned at the Science Enterprise Workshop and is really consistent with all the recommendations coming out of previous work on integrated modeling in the system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Mooney.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come talk with you today. Reclamation is seeking participants from the members of DPIIC to come collaborate on this pilot project, and we hope that it may meet or help provide insight on how to meet a portion of the recommendations from the Science Enterprises Workshop on integrated modeling. So specifically, we've been working with the Delta Science Program to pilot a focused structured decision-making framework to test some of these collaborative science-based methods for informing our resource priorities. So we would like to invite our partner agencies and stakeholders to come collaborate on this effort with us. We believe that many of our partner agencies and stakeholders have experts in areas that reclamation manages, such as the Delta smelt from the service or the salmon from nymphs, also water quality and hydrology and operations, and a whole long list of some of the different needs that we try to manage in operating the Central Valley Project. One of the challenges for any agency is how do we bring together all these disparate experts and agencies together to try to support decision making. And we think that structured decision making may provide one type of framework that can help out. Structured decision making is a collection of practices that's rooted in decision theory, and it has a wide body of knowledge and experts that have used it on different activities across the country for natural resource management. We think it may be particularly well suited for the Delta, given that it can test multiple potentially competing hypotheses and doesn't necessarily require a consensus in order to provide information. It has some very specific ways of addressing and testing uncertainty to help decide whether or not an activity may warrant further study or whether it's time to go implement something and monitor how it works out in the field. And we also think it has some benefits in providing documentation and a little bit of an institutional learning process so that we can all record where we were, how we made the decisions, and where we want to go into the future. I would say that structured decision making has been tested in the Central Valley. Reclamation worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service on a structured decision making framework for the Central Valley Project Improvement Act and those anadromous fish provisions. So I think we have a little bit of experience in how we might be able to set something up. The Delta would have some different species and probably a broader range of concerns, but there are probably some lessons to take away from that effort. We know that none of these collaboration processes are perfect, and we'll have some challenges to overcome. But we think that we can learn a little bit from the CVPIA and have some good interactions and maybe start off on a good foot for this Delta effort. I would say also that I think we've seen the CVPIA models improve every year and get more buy-in and stronger participation. So for today, the proposed pilot project would seek representatives from DPIIC members, and we would look to put those folks together into a project management team. This project management team would also include stakeholders such as our water users and environmental NGOs, fishing interests, or other folks who are wanting to participate. And that project management team would be responsible for really establishing the structure of what this proposal would look like going forward. We think that some of the characteristics of these individuals could include some strong skills for interacting with stakeholders and other agencies. We think those individuals should have a high value for collaborative processes and enjoy working with y'all. We also think that a strong understanding of decision-making roles and responsibilities so that there's a reasonable expectation of what this team would try to accomplish or not accomplish and where decisions will get made. We also think that it's important that these individuals be trusted by decision makers, so when a recommendation comes out of this group, that we can have confidence and move forward and maybe try something out. We also know that the Delta is extremely complicated, and I think there are a lot of very important details and challenges, and one of the difficult pieces will be how do we roll that information up in order to get to a decision. So being able to think through what factors do we need to specifically consider and what can we maybe leave to an implementation side would also be a key need. So I have a graphic on the slide as something to start off what I think a structured decision-making process might look like. And whenever you start drawing a line between what can be included or not be included, that's when the conversation gets interesting. And I would say that I would look to the project management team to really narrow this down. So across the top, I've just put a couple of the different types of management actions that I think we might want to see if we can model the interactions of. On the left side, I have some of the environmental factors that we may consider as inputs. And on there, you might notice that there are some that do have the potential to be influenced by different agencies or management actions. I did that on purpose to illustrate that we may not want to tackle everything all at once with this first process. At the bottom, I tried to put one of the structured decision-making terms for the quantifiable objectives, and I put just the water supply, some of the fisheries, and knowing that there may be other aspects to consider. So in the middle, that's where all the magic happens from the technical experts. There would be one or more quantitative models that represent different hypotheses for how the management actions relate to the different environmental factors and lead to one or more quantifiable objectives. And hopefully from there, we can learn a little bit about some of our priorities. So in moving forward for the next steps, I think if we have folks who are interested, there's some contact information for David Van Ryn with Reclamation or Ben Geske with the Delta Science Program. We would try to come back to the November meeting with a much better idea of what this focus scope would look like. Then I believe that in 1 to 2 years, depending on contracting actions, we could put together a model and come have some preliminary results that really focus on whether or not this was a helpful or potentially useful process or whether this is not a good way to pursue. And once we have that figured out, we can figure out what are the next steps. So I think that as we go forward, we know that there are a number of collaborative processes already at work in the Delta and in the Central Valley, in addition to the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program and also the California Water Fix Adaptive Management Framework. And I think that under this pilot project, there may be elements that overlap with some of those efforts. So my hope would be that if we come up with some useful techniques and tools that may help in informing those processes, and ideally, if folks like how this goes, there would be some development under those other processes that we could then bring back and use as part of this focused effort or the next phases. And so ultimately, I would hope that down the road that Reclamation can use this to help formulate and inform some of our out-year budgets and priorities. So thank you for the opportunity to come talk with you. There's a handout in your DPIIC packet where I tried to think through and write down in a little more detail, and I look forward to having a discussion, and hopefully some folks will be interested in participating.
Dave, thanks for preparing the proposal, to coming and providing us with this information. Any questions of Dave? Comments? Yes, Bill.
David, have you used this process before? For example, have you used it in the San Joaquin Valley for the San Joaquin Restoration Project?
For the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, we did not use structured decision-making process. It was used for the Central Valley Project Improvement Act and the anadromous fish provisions, and that has a watershed by watershed based approach.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Mark.
Excuse me, I would say that I believe that there is a version of the model that's supporting some of the San Joaquin Valley discussions.
David, I'm really encouraged by seeing Bureau of Reclamation come forward with this idea. You know, I've seen structured decision-making make real progress in Klamath, Grand Canyon, Chesapeake Bay, other places with really complex problems. So it's great to see that, and you know, you can count on our participation. I also had a comment for Jessica is about the modeling collaboratory. Is this a time for that, or?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that is a great idea. If I sit back and try and look at the big picture of maybe one of the biggest bangs for the buck for the, you know, the investment of science dollars right now might be collaborative modeling. There's places across the U.S. where USGS has co-located people, some of our climate science centers, cooperative research units, and other places. And when we do, that's where you just see modeling skyrocket, because there's, even though we live in a more or less a virtual connection world, that idea that proximity matters and literally just being able to sit down with people and walk around. So I'll tell you, USGS, we'll be behind this idea. I don't know exactly what the solution would look like, but I very much support the concept. When I looked at the proposal, pages 12 and 13 talk about establishment, and it can be pretty daunting to look at the list of state, federal, university, NGO, local, regional, private consultancy stakeholders, all the possibilities. So all I would encourage is we really should get something like this started, and we shouldn't wait until we have everything all lined up perfectly. Get started, get that flywheel turning, and then evolve. Otherwise, something like this never gets beyond the idea stage.
Cliff?
As you well know, I'm very supportive of this idea. I think this is exactly what we need to do, and this is the kind, and I think Mark gave some very good reasons as to why this is a good way to proceed. The one thing that I would like to ask is that the modeling capacity that we have in our agencies around the table, both federal and state, is pretty substantive, but the two other areas where there's lots of modeling capacity is in the consulting world and also in the academic world. And so how are we going to engage those folks in this effort also?
Others? Dave?
I think for me, we'll be inviting our stakeholders to participate, and that would include our water user community, and the water user community frequently relies upon consultants and academics to represent their interests. So I think at least for this pilot project that we will see consultants being involved.
So, and just to be clear, part of your request is not that they bring their checkbooks, but that they, if there is an interest in supporting your proposal, that they determine who in their agency would be assigned, and over the next 6 months begin a conversation that may lead to a proposal in November. Is that correct?
That's correct. So one of the first processes in structured decision making is to evaluate who needs to be at the table, who's involved in these decisions, and who's going to play a role in how these decisions are made. And that helps us identify what the different factors to consider, what the different outcomes that folks are looking for, and also some of the underlying assumptions that would lead to success or failure if we do try to make a decision based off this information.
Felicia?
We're supportive and already have folks assigned to work with you, and happy to try and find the best example or the best vehicle for us to inch our way into figuring out how to work together in a way that helps each other. But I just have a question trying to follow even the stuff around the gearbox in your where the magic happens in the design. Part of the discussion will be, I'm assuming with the small group, to figure out where is that perfect place that aligns. Perfect's maybe too big of a word, but where's that sweet spot in terms of the stuff that modelers put in a room who are trying to do a lot of different things can help find the place where that collaborative work is going to yield the most benefit the most easily versus creating the perfect new structure, right? So part of it is not just who needs to be there, it's what could be a useful outcome in the world by using the structured decision-making, right?
That's true. So I think we'd find that there may be a number of different hydrologic models. There's strengths and weaknesses to all different models. Structured decision-making is one way of bringing together those different pieces and testing it against a fisheries model or a water quality model or an operations model.
Carl.
So thanks, Dave. We've talked a little bit about this. I think the department's interested in it. The adaptive management framework for the BIOPS and the water fix includes or recognizes structured decision-making, and I think the question is how this all fits together. And so I think we're open to exploring that in this first phase of how we would use it and what it would look like. We'll continue to work with you as we go as you go forward.
Thank you.
Kathy, I know that NIMS has been in conversation with Dave and apparently is supportive of further investigation.
I guess I directly haven't been in contact with Dave, but I think you've spoken with others in our office. But yeah, I mean, we were part of the decision of the framework development, so I think we take a similar approach to it, and do want to kind of come up with a process and figure out how that works with what we've got in the framework, and not necessarily duplicate an effort with some of the other programs that are already out there, but do something that would allow everyone who needs to be at the table and figure out a way to make the decisions.
Thank you. My expectations, there'll be enough of an overlap where there'll be benefits from going through this exercise, and there'll be benefits from also participating in the framework.
So not to put anybody else on the spot, but we have a volunteer, Campbell.
Well, thank you, David. I think the work that we've been doing in cash flow is very much on the diagram showing sort of the collaborative planning environment. And part of that collaborative planning environment is very important are the tools that you can actually use to really make that a much richer discussion and bring data and information together in better ways. So very supportive of your approach and your idea, and very happy to participate and engage as we move forward.
Thank you.
Cindy?
Well, I've had the good fortune to talk a little bit with Dave in the past about this, and we had a really great presentation at one of the camped meetings on the CVPIA structured decision-making. So it's a very intriguing idea, and also we've been part of developing the framework for the adaptive management. So I would just say we're very supportive of this and appreciate you coming today, and then kind of, I'm just very intrigued by how we can kind of move these kind of things forward. So thanks.
Thank you.
That's great. Michelle?
I volunteer Dave Mooney. No, kidding aside.
No, you're not kidding.
So just to kind of put a little bit of an icing on this, I think, there are some realities, especially on the federal side, that we're going to have to deal with in the future. And, one of the issues we've always struggled with is trying to do as much or more with fewer resources and trying to prioritize and align those resources. I think, combined with the fact that we're trying to do more with less, we're also trying to take the mindset that no one agency has a monopoly on Delta science. I think those two things sort of combined together, I think really give us a lot of credence and hope for the structured decision-making process, because I think it can help us maybe get out of some of the ruts that sometimes we tend to fall into. So I know I'm, obviously a supporter of Dave. Yay, Dave. But I will just say that there are many reasons that I think this is a good idea, and just happy to see everybody's support. So thank you.
Anyone else? Dan? Fish and Wildlife Service ready to join the team?
Well, I considered us already to be part of the team.
Great.
But just to emphasize The Department of the Interior and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have, over a decade, embraced structured decision-making. We engaged in a broad scale with the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which encompasses the Central Valley, but I think one of the first focused efforts we engaged in was on the American River and some of the restoration activities there. So it's had a history within the Central Valley, and fully endorse moving ahead with it. I don't know if I can make a staffing commitment right now with a particular name, but we'll go back, and we've been talking about it, who to devote to the activity.
Good. Yeah, and the team I was referring to is the pilot project management team. I know you're a part of the big team, like the major leagues. All right, Dave, you got enough out of this to be encouraged?
Very encouraged. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for bringing the proposal to us. Jessica, anything else on this matter?
No, Mark, I appreciate your comments about how this has worked in other areas and how this could help support our collaborative efforts here. I think that what we've been talking about is that this is a good pilot study to get started down that path, that the idea of a collaboratory is one that's been percolating for a few years now, and that I think there's very much a common vision around that. Everyone that I've talked to has said that science emphasizes that science is a long-term investment and that there's definitely a need to continue to do that. And so I wouldn't want to suggest that maybe we go to the next step of doing a feasibility report or coming back, but I think at the November meeting, when we hear back from this project management team about this pilot study and where it's going, I think that might be a good time to continue to keep this idea of a collaboratory coming back and use that as background as we move forward. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that, especially in times we're being asked to do more with less and all of these kinds of things, a new idea like a modeling collaboratory is tough to get started, and you want to make sure things are lined up. I think it would be a wasted opportunity, and would be a wasted opportunity if 5 years from now we're still kind of talking about it as a concept.
Sounds like a challenge, Jessica. You want to bring us something back in November?
I would be happy to.
All right, good. Anything else on agenda item 4? If not, I think we're about to the end of the meeting. I have on my list, one, some of you can expect a contact from Jessica regarding administrative performance measures and DeltaView update help. You heard the idea of the need for programmatic or regional permitting as it relates to ecosystem restoration projects in the Delta to be thinking about. We heard Skip Thompson volunteer the Delta Protection Commission to work closely with the agencies responsible for ecosystem restoration in the Delta and better connect the local government with state and federal government. You heard from Cliff the 5-year science action priorities within the science action agenda. It's out for your review, and comments will be appreciated. We heard about the executive order. Your input on lessons learned about the drought is up for your input. And then finally, we heard from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation on this request for a pilot project management team that I think was well supported around the table. Have I missed anything?
One other request I heard earlier from EPA is to continue to engage with the estuary partnership. I just wanted to acknowledge that Caitlin Sweeney, who's the executive director, is here today. And I'm happy to continue to go to those implementation committee meetings and stay engaged with that.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments? We offer public comment to anyone that wishes to stand up to the microphone and offer public comment. Seeing none, thank you all for attending. This meeting is adjourned.